we welcome you to another live edition of the Sports Box, your go-to sports podcast featuring great content, conversation, and your occasional disagreement. Stick around to interact and ask questions. The Sports Box is brought to you by our sponsor, Showcase Sports, located on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton, New Jersey. Showcase Sports for the elite player. Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back once again with another episode of Sweet Tea here on the Sports Box. Already messed up the intro. That's a great start to the show, but we're fired up tonight. We have a very special guest coming on in a few minutes. We're just going to stall for time because he said he had to go get a drink and some snacks and stuff before he was good to go. As always, I am Noah Dog Diber, representing the two-time defending national champion Georgia Bulldogs. Had to get that one out of the way in the first minute. Joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Guard Charger Patrick, representing his Florida Gators. How are you doing tonight, my friend?
We're fired up as always. Really good guests lined up. Another week closer to the start of the college football season. And what have it more chaos today in the world of college football. All the Pac-12 fans out there, like Andrew Edmondson himself, crying major tears of pain. But yeah, just kind of continues the streak of one, great guest here on the show, and two, kind of breaking, crazy, mind-blowing news on the day or right around the day of the show never fails.
Yeah, it never fails. I mean, it's like I said, right? We took a freaking, 6-month break in the off season. We did one show for 6 months, and then nothing happens during those 6 months, right? But then when we decide to come back, sorry, I'm just typing up a banner here that I forgot to do last minute. When we decide to come back, the Northwestern scandal happens. Pat Fitzgerald gets fired. San Diego State is beefing with their conference, and we think they're going to get kicked out. And now it's they're going to play 2 more years, blah, blah, blah. And now Colorado news, they're going to go back to the Big 12. It's just absolutely crazy. And good timing on that as well, Garth, because it's our Big 12 show. It's a good thing they didn't break that a week from now or last week, because they decided to break it on the day we're actually talking about the Big 12. It's just perfect. And we have a lot to talk about the Big 12, not just the teams that are in it. We'll talk about TCU, Kansas State, all of them a little bit later, but also Texas and Oklahoma, Garth, their final year in the Big 12. New teams coming in. They got 3 coming in from the American, and BYU as an independent as well. So they're going to have a 14-team conference this year, Garth. I think it's going to be a very interesting one. But yes, we're gonna wait a few more minutes for our guests to come in here. And while I do that, got a couple more comments coming in. Obviously, Garth having to come in with the good old Ric Flair woo comment, because as always, we are definitely fired up. Tom says, stuffing my mouth with buttercream cake. Let's go, Brian. It is Tom's birthday, which I didn't know until 5 minutes ago. So happy birthday to him.
Happy birthday to the man himself, Tom Scavetta.
The man, the myth, the legend. And Andrew says, back the pack. Well, I had to do some trolling on Andrew before the show.
Kind of running out on total teams to even back, Noah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be long until they're the Pac-2 instead of the Pac-12 with the way they're going recently. But I do like the Pac-12. It's just they are in a sticky situation. I do think they need to get San Diego State in there, because if they don't want to stay in the Mountain West anyway, they might as well look to getting them in. Colorado will move back to the Big 12 next year. What's your take on that? We're going to get into that a little bit later. Let me just pull up that page. I don't know why it always says Facebook user when you broadcast that page. It's so dumb. Henry says that. I know Henry's a big Colorado fan. In my opinion, I think it's a money move. I'll get into more specifics later, but I think the Pac-12, it's the lowest earning Power 5 conference. It has been for a long time. It's not even close either. And Garth, it's not a coincidence that they timed that right as the Pac-12 media TV deal expires, because they want a piece of that big, $31 million or something like that they can get from that new Big 12 TV deal. So I think it's purely a money move. It's a conference they played in the past as well.
They're jumping ship while they can, Noah.
Yeah, they're trying to get to the lifeboats on the Titanic pretty much, I think, which is a shame, because even though I do troll the Pac-12 a lot, I do actually enjoy watching it. I think it's a very entertaining conference. But I mean, look, you lose USC and UCLA. I mean, it's just always going to be tough to recover from that. I don't think losing Colorado is the straw that broke the camel's back or anything, but it doesn't help. I mean, they do need to get some teams in, and the realignments lately have been insane. I think the big loser from the Big 12 realignment, getting all these teams, is actually Conference USA, because they only have 9 teams left or something. Because as soon as the American lost their 3 teams, the American decided to take about half of Conference USA's teams, and so now they had to add FCS teams and whatnot. And I couldn't even tell you half of the Conference USA's roster this year. I mean, I think Kennesaw State is in there. So there's a local Georgia team. I've been to Kennesaw State multiple times, but yeah. Y'all can have that trash. They never fit. Andrew is fired up. He did say he would be fired up for this. People acting like they want the pack to crumble. I don't want it to crumble. I just think it's possible that it could. They need to get some teams in fast. One of the oldest conferences in the country. And that's true. They're about as old as you, Andrew. They're about 90 years old at this point. So good on them. They have kept kicking for quite a while now. But yeah, we're just going to wait a few more minutes here. While we do wait, actually, let me go ahead and throw up this crowd play ad, because just kind of get out of the way, because once we get into talking, Garth, we're going to have way too much to talk about. So we'll just run this ad for about a minute, and we'll be right back. Andrew says people want all that history to just disappear. Andrew's fired up, man. I love it. We're all fired up for the show. But yeah, Big 12 predictions is for this week, Garth. We're going to do the Big 10 next week. So this is our 3rd prediction show. I think it is. The Big 12 is an interesting one, right? Because TCU last year, they went on that, Cinderella run where no one expected. I don't even know if we talked about TCU at all, Garth, in preseason last year when we were talking about the Big 12. But they won that Cinderella run. They went to the championship game, actually, but unfortunately for them, 65-7. That's what happened to them. But a weird note, Garth, TCU didn't even win the Big 12 last year. They lost to Kansas State in the championship game in overtime, which I think some people just kind of forget, because TCU made the playoffs anyway and beat Michigan. But I think the interesting thing about the Big 12, Garth, when I look at their teams, there's – how do I say this? There's not that one team that you look at and say that's a terrible team. Like, there's not a Vanderbilt, there's not a Rutgers, Yeah, there were teams last year. Like, I don't think West Virginia was good last year. I don't think Iowa State was good, but they're all at least decent teams, I think. There's not that one outlier team that you say, yeah, that's the team that's gonna, be 2-10 this year. I think there's a lot of really solid teams, but I think it's a bit like the Pac-12. I think at the top there are multiple teams that could compete for it. I think Texas is a big one. I mean, you have the number 3 recruiting class in the whole country. You got to take a next step. Year 2 for Brent Venables. They had a great recruiting class as well. TCU, obviously, Kansas State, maybe Oklahoma State could take a next step, because honestly, I think they did addition by subtraction with losing Spencer Sanders. But before we get into more specifics, what's just kind of your general overview of the Big 12 this year?
Yeah, so it's very similar to the Pac-12 to me, Noah, where there's probably like 3 or 4 teams that you could make a pretty solid case for as to why you could see them winning the division. There's also a lot of what I like personally. There's a lot of like what if factor with this conference. Like, we don't really know what to expect until we actually see it. Mm-hmm. And actually a team that our guests will be able to talk in a lot of detail about, UCF is kind of like the major question mark for me, because as much as I like to troll them and hate them because of like the not really rivalry, but like the in-state kind of trash talking, I guess is the best way to put it, has really been heating up because they're getting a lot more recognition in these recent years. Obviously a lot of good seasons in recent history. So now they're like, hey guys, it's time to take notice. Like, we're a good program here in the state of Florida. We want kind of the same respect and credit that the other big three get. So they're kind of like my big what if. Can they come in like right away and have a lot of success? Then there's a lot of teams that you don't really know, like Oklahoma State. They lose Spencer Sanders, a guy who neither one of us are very big on, who should help them, honestly, because we felt like that's a guy who really held them back, especially in 2021 when they had a damn good team. They made a Big 12 title run. He played absolutely horrible pretty much the whole season, and they still were able to make it in. Baylor, a team that's been good in recent years, that is kind of like we could see him taking a step back. We could see him overachieving a little bit. What to expect with the Baylor Bears and Dave Aranda, who have a really tough start to the season, playing Utah and Texas back to back. TCU, like you said, they went on that Cinderella run last season. They lose a lot. They lose a lot to the NFL draft. It'll be really interesting to see how they can rebound that. How hard is that title run hangover going to be? One team that I'm going to have my eyes on, Noah, actually, is Texas Tech, because this is a team that was kind of sneaky good last year, flew under the radar, had that kind of high-flying offense that we're used to seeing out of them. They played some people tough. They had some good, solid wins last year, made a bowl game, I'm pretty sure. So I'm looking to see if they can take a step forward. I really like their coaching position or situation, rather. There at Texas Tech, they got a player's coach for sure. Seen a lot of kind of like motivational speeches from him on the side. So just, a really, really interesting conference top to bottom for me, Noah. Obviously, Texas and Oklahoma, the two big dogs that get the most hype, get the most recognition, talked about on a weekly basis. Their last kind of hoorah in the Big 12 before they come over to the SEC and get hopefully pummeled and boat raced by teams like the Georgia Bulldogs, Florida Gators, Alabama Crimson Tide, et cetera, et cetera. But, it'll be interesting to see, can either one of them kind of go out on top. I do like both of their coaching situations, both of their rosters, but how they pan out this year will have to remain to be seen. But, yeah, just a really, really interesting conference top to bottom for me, Noah.
Yeah, definitely. I think, not just the existing teams, which you obviously went in depth with right there, but I really like what they did getting some of these other teams in. I mean, when you're talking teams like BYU, Houston, Cincy, and UCF, whether you like these teams or not, these are all teams, Garth, that last year were 8 or 9 win teams. We saw Cincy go to the playoffs back in 2021. We saw UCF be the 2017 national champions, if you will, because they went undefeated that year or whatever. But, it may not be like they're getting, these Power 5 powerhouses to come in there from another conference and steal and whatnot, but they are getting, pretty competitive, solid teams from, in my opinion, what is the best Group 5 conference in the American. I don't even think it's close at this point, especially with how they basically just took half the Conference USA to join their conference recently. But let me see. What is this? I'm just talking to our guest real quick. Sounds like he's having technical difficulties. Not sure what that's about. But yeah. All right. We got some more comments coming in.
Yeah, they're fired up about the Pac-12.
Mikey says,
"You guys are a day late and $1 short." That was last week, guys.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, the Pac-12 show was last week. I don't even know if Mikey was in the comments. Obviously, Andrew was our guest when his internet was stable and not going out every 5 minutes. But says the Pac-9 is the worst Power 5. Should be a Group 5. Teams like Washington, Oregon, Utah, etc., are absolutely not Group 5. Well, you know what, Andrew? In the past 2 years, a Group 5 team has made the playoffs more than Power 5 teams, because UCF blew their chance last year and Cincinnati made it the year before. So how about that? How about that, Andrew?
And the Pac-12 champions lost to an SEC team that didn't even compete for an SEC title.
Yeah. might compete with the independent league. Mike is fired up. He's
here to raise some hell.
he's trolling. I love it. I love it. I'm just firing up Andrew. See, you know what they're up to, but you always respond, Andrew. You always take the bait and fire them up even more. But yes, sounds like there's still technical difficulties backstage. So I guess we'll kind of get into it. Hopefully he can get in a little bit later. But we're going to start with the Oklahoma and Texas thing first, because I think even though they're leaving next year, this is very important for the Big 12. They're initially going to go to the SEC in 2025, but after negotiating a $100 million settlement back in February with the Big 12, Oklahoma and Texas have been approved to move the SEC a year earlier than expected in 2024. So this is the last year they will be in the Big 12. They were both founding members of the Big 12 back in 1994. This is a big deal, guards. So we've talked about this a good bit in the past, at least the first part, not so much the second part. Your opinions on Oklahoma and Texas leaving for the SEC, and what do you think they could actually be able to do in the Big 12 in their final season?
Yeah, so first and foremost, the move to the SEC, whether or not we really like it, Noah, or not even really do we like it or not, I guess it's the fact that was it actually needed? Like the SEC, I don't think really had to have either one of these teams. I think it's smart on their part. Obviously, whenever you're going from any conference to the SEC, at least as of right now, you're going to the best conference in college football. It should help from a recruiting standpoint. It should help from a TV contract money-making standpoint for the university as a whole, because for most major colleges, football makes up the vast majority of their revenue. So I think that on their part, at least, it's a very, very smart move. I do think I really don't know how to feel about it yet, because I like the fact that they're coming to the SEC. I think it's a good addition. I just think that I don't like the fact that it's going to get rid of the SEC West and the SEC East. It's just going to be a top to bottom conference with the number 1 and number 2 teams playing, because I think that it kind of gets rid of a little bit of tradition, Noah. Like we love to troll each other and make fun of each other's team, talk trash. But one thing that we definitely can agree on is that the SEC East has always been Florida, Georgia, battling it out. Whichever team is better that year is going to be most likely the SEC East champion and playing for SEC title. And now kind of that all goes out the door, and it's like, okay, it's just the SEC, and whichever one of these two teams is the best overall record-wise, instead of actually winning their division and then playing the best team in the other division. So I kind of got to wait and reserve, give that a few years, see how it plays out, this or that, before I make like a solid, concrete opinion on it. But as of right now, I'm kind of indifferent, not really super ecstatic. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense for them, Noah. And I think too, one thing, SEC is the best conference in football, but things can always get better or get improved upon or get even bigger. And I think because of the fan base and the following that both of these teams have, it's only going to make the SEC even bigger and better and more popular. So obviously that's a plus if you like seeing the SEC as a whole do well. And then lastly, it'll be really interesting to see how they compete, because the Big 12 and the SEC is night and day difference. We joke about it all the time. The Big 12 is not exactly known for playing defense, just like a conference like the Pac-12. Big 10, I will give a little bit of respect to. They do have some teams that outside of the playoffs play really solid defense. So it'll be interesting to see how they make that transition and if they can actually sustain success in the SEC or not. It'll really be interesting to see. A lot of people have at least Oklahoma as one of the most successful programs ever. So now they're really going to be tested. Now they're going to be up against the big dogs. We'll see how it goes.
Oh my God, more comments coming in. Let's see. Mike says, I'm going with Oklahoma State to win it all this year. Love Gundy. Yeah, like Garth said, I mean, they were in the championship game just the year before last, and they lost to Baylor because Spencer Sanders threw like 4 interceptions, but their defense was great that year. And even then, it still came down to a goal line stand by Baylor, if I remember right. Mike Gundy's a very good coach.
They definitely miss Knowles, though. That's for sure.
Yeah. I hope the entire conference goes winless. Andrew, unfortunately for you, that is impossible because of conference games, some team has to win, and there are no ties in college football anymore. So that is physically impossible for that to happen. It's better. Here's the thing. All right, this whole divisions versus no divisions debate. We've talked about this in the past, Garth. I have always said I'm fine with no divisions if you keep protected rivalries. So you can get rid of the SC West and SC East, but you still need to protect the rivalries to where you still have Georgia, Florida every year, Georgia, Auburn, the Iron Bowl. What else? What's another good one? I already said the Iron Bowl. You know what I mean.
LSU, Alabama,
LSU, Alabama, Tennessee,
the
Alabama, stuff
Egg
like
Bowl,
that. Egg
Mississippi
Bowl,
State,
yeah,
Ole Miss.
yes. Or Pac-12. You got ones like the Apple Cup, Big 12. Well, not anymore, but I guess now in the SEC you have the Red River rivalry, stuff like that. If you protect the rivalries, I don't really mind having divisions. I think it's most glaring with a conference like the Big Ten, where basically the past couple years, the Ohio State-Michigan game has been the de facto Big Ten championship game. And then they play some like 4-loss Iowa or I think it was Purdue last year team in the championship game, and they just win by like 49 points. It's not even competitive. I think that's the main reason they're getting rid of divisions. And I do understand that I'm not going to be beat up with divisions being gone, Garth. As long as they protect the rivalries, I don't really mind not having divisions, and that's the way it's going. I mean, pretty much every conference we already talked about no longer has divisions, and I think would the SEC be the last Power 5 team to go to no divisions next year? I'm pretty sure all the other ones. I know the ACC's done it, Pac-12, Big 12. Has the Big 10 already done it?
I think they start this year.
This year, so then the SEC would be the last one.
Really, the only downside to it, Noah, as long as they do protect rivalries, because like you said, I totally agree on that front, would be the fact that it's going to make out of conference scheduling a little bit harder, because the majority of your schedule is going to be in conference games, whereas like now, you're used to playing like 8 in conference and 4 out of conference. So there's still going to be 1 or 2 out of conference games. But because there's less, you're probably every year going to see those out of conference games be against like Middle Tennessee State or Eastern Washington. You're probably not going to get these games like Georgia Clemson or Oregon Georgia, whatever, those big time blockbusters, which, it definitely sucks, at least from my standpoint, because I do really like seeing those kind of matchups. But it's not, the end of the world. It's not going to make it a less enjoyable experience or anything like that.
There's just a spider crawling on the underside of my hat. I had to kill it real quick. He was too attracted to the back-to-back national championships.
Not only that, you're rocking the Spider-Man colors. Go figure.
I am. I got this basic ass blue shirt with nothing on it, and obviously the red and black hat. So there you go, and a little bit of white as well. Let's see. I'm completely off topic, but did you play the Crewfest beta? I'm pretty sure he did. I remember mentioning it, I think.
I did, yeah, a little. Actually, no, I didn't. And
You
the reason
didn't?
being, not because I couldn't or forgot about it. I did not end up getting a code. It was not a open beta. It was they selected at random certain people and sent out codes. And unfortunately, I did not get one. I did watch some gameplay, though, on YouTube.
He's a man, says Mikey. Andrew says the Pac-12 was the first conference to do away with divisions once the NCAA said divisions were no longer mandatory for a title game. Well, no one cares about the Pac-12's divisions anyway, so that's not really a surprise there.
We could have used all this knowledge last week in that trivia session that we absolutely tanked.
It was bad. Now, I will say in our defense, right, a lot of those were like guys from the 50s
Wicked
and 60s.
old.
Like it was
Wicked old. Like
it was ridiculous, dude.
Me and Noah may be history buffs and nerds, but like, come on now. We don't know who played quarterback for Washington State in 1952 off the top of our heads.
Pac-9 blows chunks. Quiet down, old man. Well, I will say this. We control the Pac all we want, but I do remember a certain bowl game last year that when Oregon State played Florida, and it was like 30-0, and they kicked a chip shot.
Me up now.
They kicked a chip shot field goal to keep their scoring streak going. But, man, they ran into the Beaver buzzsaw last year, Garth. Back the Pac. That's right. That is right. Looks like our guest is still having technical difficulties, so we're just going to keep stalling.
Good man, Mikey. The streak is still very much alive.
Hey, Mikey, you know what other streak is still alive? Fuck. Your streak of having 6 and 7 seasons of back-to-back years, and it's going to be broken this year. I will say that it'll be broken because you guys will go 4-8 this year and actually do worse. But
Yeah,
Yeah,
at least one thing beat us in the losing department, Noah.
yeah. His Wi-Fi was not having fun, but the funniest part was him going "God damn," and then he just freezes, and you don't hear what he's about to
He
say.
got censored.
He got his Wi-Fi sensitive. Even though we're not really a family-friendly show, we do curse sometimes. But I guess when Andrew does it, then it's not allowed. But yeah, moving on to the next segments, we talked about Texas, Oklahoma, and I do agree with you. I think it's really tough, right? I hope Oklahoma takes the next step because I love Venables. I think if he can improve their defense like he did with Clemson his last year, where they had no offense because DJ was terrible, but their defense was lights out. They don't need an elite defense. I just think if Oklahoma has a good offense, maybe not as good as it was in the past with Lincoln Riley, because I think that's really hard to do. Say what you want about Lincoln Riley, the guy is an offensive genius. But even if that takes a step back, if they could just have an average defense guard, their problem is their offenses have been great. Then they get to the playoff. They play a team like Alabama that can match their offense. They lose like 70-35 or some BS. Like that's not even an exaggeration. That's been Oklahoma's story. So if they can just have a mediocre defense, like I think they'd be much better. Texas is really tough. I think it depends on what Quinn Ewers they get because I think we saw last year in the first half of that Alabama game before he got hurt. He was absolutely incredible. He was lighting them up. It looked like Texas was going to win the game. He got injured, and for the rest of the year, other than flashes here and there, it just seemed like he wasn't really the same guy. So we'll see what happens there. But looks like we're about to get our guest on. Month-long profile pick bet on that foreign prediction. Absolutely not happening. I may be a troll, but I'm not an idiot. I may love trolling Florida, but I don't know about that one. Didn't Oklahoma have like a top 10 defensive efficiency team? I
No,
think.
the exact opposite. I actually know this because I was looking it up before the show. They ranked 122nd nationally in defense last year. Real quick, no, one thing I want to mention, super quick here. For me, Oklahoma on paper, probably their worst roster in recent years headed into the season. They have a lot of question marks on both sides of the ball, but they benefit from I don't want to say easy schedule, but easier than they're used to schedule this year. On the other hand, Texas looks like a really good team on paper. It just doesn't all come together on the football field, and it's really hard because, like you said, Quinn Ewers kind of a two-sided tale, if you will, in large part due to the injury, and also Sarkisian is still very unproven as a head coach. Obviously, great coordinator at Alabama, but we're yet to really see what he's capable of as a head coach.
Yeah, I mean, he had those jobs at USC, Washington. Didn't really work out at either of those. He was a great coordinator, like you said there. I do know him pretty well, actually, since I'm a Falcons fan. He was our OC for a year, and man, he was just he was something. Let's just say that. It was tough taking over for Kyle Shanahan. But anyways, without any further delay, we're finally going to get our guest on. He is a big college football fan. He's one of the only sane UCF fans that I in history. He has his own podcast. We'll get in that a little bit later. Brian McArdle, host of From the Stands. How are you doing tonight, my friend?
Hello, gentlemen. Sorry about those technical difficulties. That's what I get for getting a brand new microphone. We're on the backup here, so hopefully we are good to go moving forward.
You're a little bit quiet. Is there any way you could turn your mic up?
How we doing now?
There we go. Perfect.
There we go. Yep.
So Brian, we haven't really talked face to face before, but it's kind of funny. We're all members of Review and Preview, but we haven't even talked about college football really. College football is mine and Gar's favorite sport. I know we do the hockey stuff over there, but I know you're a big college football guy as well. You have your own podcast over at From the Stands. So tell us a little bit about yourself. For people that might not know who you are, how you got into college football, why you're a UCF fan, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the sport goes, it's just one of the most fascinating sports that you can have with regards to, the national landscape. You've got 120 plus teams just in one division, the top tier. Obviously, football has been the most popular sport in America for the longest time. So you got these kids out here grinding from the age of like 6 up until they're 18, looking for a shot, to be on the Saban team, to be on a Kirby Smart team and make it to the NFL. So there's just so many players, so many dynamics. And I know we have the argument now that NIL players can get paid. It's not about the passion anymore. But I think that's all still bull for now. The money's going to come down a little bit. It's the very beginning. Let it cool off. Things will get back to normal. But yeah, I mean, it's probably the second best sport. I know you guys are hockey guys. I'm a soccer guy outside of college football. So, the
nice.
World Cup to me is always like the top tier competition, but college football is right there at number 2.
Hey, that's great, Brian, because I'm probably like one of only 3 people in your whole life that actually does watch soccer as well. So there you go.
Probably.
But Jesus Christ, UCF fan, here we go. He's not like the other ones. He's not like the ones you're thinking of. He's a every time. So we're both good friends with Tom Scavetta. He's actually one of your co-hosts over there on From the Stands. I've known Tom for a few years now, and every time I talk to Tom about college football, he's always like, "Yeah, Brian made another prediction that was correct. This guy's always right. I'm always wrong." Stuff like that. I'm just like, I got to talk to this guy because he sounds like he's kind of like a Nostradamus. I do know you picked UGA to win it all last year, so good on you for that. Which look, hey man, I had to deal with 1980 jokes for 40 years, so the past 2 years have been long overdue. But tell us how to be a single person podcaster. It's really tough to do that. I think you really do need a co-host. Like, you need someone to play off of. Like, you can do it, but it's a lot harder to do it by yourself. Probably starts with better Wi-Fi. Yeah. What's your opinion on the 2017 Natty title win at UCF? You got any thoughts on that one, Brian?
Yes, I do consider it fake for the most part. But fans have been claiming the fake titles for a while. Looking at you, Nebraska. Yeah, I don't know. It was a great accomplishment that season for us. Those 2 seasons in a row for us. I don't consider it a legitimate national title, of course. But I think, for a program, it's weird. We are I think, still top 3 biggest in terms of overall enrollment. Our campus size is probably the biggest in the entire nation. They build 24/7. It's basically like a Disney park at this point. There's just construction going up all the time. But we're still fairly new. We're less than 50 years old. Our sports programs are, less than 40 years old. So I'll take the accomplishment, but I'm not taking the title.
You did not deal with that joke for 40 years. Of course I did, Andrew. I'm friggin' 55 years old, man. But yes, Brian. I forgot to make a banner with your link, but the link to From the Stands is actually in the Facebook post description. So if you guys are big college football fans, go check them out. I believe it's you, Tom, and Andy Hopper, right?
That is correct. Tom is our most analytical figure, and Andy is what I'll say is our wild card. Like you were just saying, a one-man host is pretty difficult, but when you can get a good team together, you can get a good show going.
Well, let's get right into it. Garth and I already talked about this first topic while we were waiting for you. Oklahoma and Texas. This is kind of the big thing with the Big 12 this year. It's going to be their last year in the conference because they reached a $100 million settlement with the Big 12 to move out of the Big 12 a year early to head to the SEC. So it's their last year in the Big 12, Brian, and this is big because these are 2 teams that are founding members. They've had lots of success in the past. But for some reason, for the last couple of years, mainly Texas. I mean, Texas has been down for quite a while, it seems. Oklahoma had, success under Lincoln Riley. They got in Brent Venables now. They're kind of going in a rebuilding direction. What are your thoughts on, first of all, those 2 teams moving to the SEC? And also what you think they could do in the Big 12 this year? Do you think they could take that next step, maybe contend for the conference, or do you think they're just kind of be more of the same for them this year?
Yeah, so I'll try to keep this one quick because I did hear you guys while I was waiting backstage. I already talking about this one. It's my fault for the technical difficulties. As far as the move to the SEC, I mean, they got to do what they got to do. It's the biggest conference in all of college football. Sorry, Big Ten fans. But, that's where the money is. That's where the top talent is across the board for the most part. So, I mean, if the opportunity is there, you don't say no to it. So the opportunity was there. They were asked. They're getting a hell of a TV deal. So, more money, better competition, helps the recruiting. All things are going for you at that point. So if you're Oklahoma or Texas, you got to make that move. As far as their last season here in the Big 12 and whether they can sort of, come back from what I would say was middling seasons for both of them.
Yeah.
Oklahoma, it was a tough time. It was Brent Venables' first season as a head coach, so there's going to be growing pains. They started the season 2-0, but it was weak competition. You lose 3 straight. Fair enough, very good competition. That was K-State, TCU, and Texas, all 3 in a row. But the Texas game was an absolute blowout, 49-0, and they just never recovered after that. So 6-7 season, I think just because that's so bad, they can do better pretty easily, I feel like. I think the growing pains won't be as bad. We've all seen what Venables can do with the defense, so over at Clemson. So I think, yeah, they're not going to go 6-7 again, in my opinion. As for Texas, even though it wasn't a great season, it was pretty respectable. If we're going to be honest, 8-4 in the regular season, 8-5 overall. I'm sure their fans are saying, "Oh, who cares about the bowl games?" But you still lost it. But their only in-season loss was a 1-point loss to number 1 Alabama, which was a 2019 thriller. The 37-34 overtime loss to Texas Tech. Again, that game was on the road. That's a tough game. I know Joey McGuire's a new head coach at Texas Tech, but that's still a tough game on the road. And then lost, I think, to Oklahoma State, who was around number 10 or 11 at the time. 1 possession loss. And to TCU. So those are solid losses. I think they've got a lot going for them as a team. You got Quinn Ewers with some respectable playtime under his belt now. He was kind of a question mark just because he's got a little bit of that wild child mentality going on. PR loves to jump on that, but I think he's a really good QB. And even when he was out, Hudson Card stepped in pretty well. But yeah, I think more importantly, I caught the back end of you guys talking about this, is the scheduling. And what I like here about Texas's schedule is that I think if they can keep it 2 losses or less, and at least keep it close against Alabama again, they've got a shot at the CFP. If they beat Alabama early, I mean, who knows? Milroe, unproven at QB. So who knows what can happen? This game's pretty early in the season. I think week 2, I believe.
Yeah.
Someone wants to correct me if that's wrong.
Yeah, that's correct. I got it.
Okay. So yeah, you got Quinn Ewers, who's looking good. That's a great team under Sarkisian. You lose Bijan Robinson, of course. That's a lot of offensive production gone, but I like Ewers' arm. They almost did it last year, so hell, why not do it this year, right?
Yeah, I agree with you about Oklahoma. I love Brent Venables. I think we saw how brilliant he was in 2021, right? Where they had DJ at quarterback, and look, DJ's just, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but as a quarterback, I think Oregon State's going to be in for a rude awakening this year. But their defense was incredible. Like, even that UGA game, they only lost because they lost 10-3, and the touchdown was a pick six by Christopher Smith. Like, their defense was ridiculous that year. I think the thing with Oklahoma, I was saying this to Garth before you got on, in the past, they've always had those incredible offenses under Lincoln Riley. But then they get to the playoffs, they play a really good team like in Alabama, and they lose like 70-35 because they just have no defense, and the other team has an offense as well. I think if Oklahoma, their offense isn't going to be like it was under Lincoln Riley. Say what we want about him, control him all, about choking all we want. The guy's an offensive mastermind. But if they can have, a solid offense and at least a mediocre defense, not like a top 120 defense, like even if it's just in the 70s or 80s, I think Oklahoma could be pretty good this year. I think with Texas, it comes down to Quinn Ewers, plain and simple. You mentioned the Alabama game. Before he got injured, he was just absolutely lighting that team up. Like, if he didn't get injured, I would 100% say Texas won that game. They had all the momentum. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was, maybe some nagging injury problem or maybe something mental. After he got injured, he had good moments here and there, but I think he was never quite the same as he was early in the season. He had a bit of inconsistency, a few too many turnovers. If he's on, I think Texas could be really good. And by the way, both those teams had top 5 recruiting classes this year as well. So it's going to be interesting to see. And plus Sarkisian, we'll see what Sarkisian does as well. I think that's another important factor. Tom says, hell yeah, what's up, Brian? Noah and Garth got a great guest tonight. Brian, the college football genius, McArdle, is on the show.
Thank you.
Josh McMurray says, go Gators. Can't agree with that. My forefathers suffered that, they did. My grandpa would be proud. Yeah, my grandpa, rest in peace, did go to Florida. So that is one link that I do have. Sorry, Pac-9 and Mountain West fans, Andrew. At least Oklahoma gave the mighty FSU a run for their
They
money.
sure did.
Week 2, yeah. Nice sliding guard, just like the good old Gator Blue.
Yep, Tom's home away from home in second team.
Tom riles me up so much. He has that effect on people. So yeah, all right. Now this is what I really want to talk about, Brian. This is probably the most important topic to you. The teams coming in this year. So obviously we know they're going to lose Texas, Oklahoma this year, but for right now they're still in, and they're also adding 4 teams. So there's going to be a 14-team conference this year, which is pretty insane. Now, I was telling Brian or Garth this before you got on. I look at the Big 12, and I might not see that one elite team that clearly stands out above the rest, but I don't really see a team like a Vanderbilt either, or a team like a Rutgers, to where you look at one team and say, man, that team's like really bad. I think every team, like, yeah, obviously West Virginia and Iowa State were good last year. Oklahoma was rebuilding. But there's not that one team you look at and like, man, this team could probably win 2 games this year. Like, I think all the teams are at least pretty decent. I think it's overall a really competitive conference. And then you get these teams in. I was telling Garth this as well. All 4 of these teams, Brian, 8 or 9 win teams last year. Cincinnati made the playoffs back in 2021. Obviously, your UCF Golden Knights, that great season they had back in 2017. They're not adding scrubs here. They're adding, really good teams, good Group 5 teams from, in my opinion, what has always been consistently the best Group 5 conference by far in the American. They're getting these guys in. So I want your thoughts on this. First, just from a neutral perspective as a college football fan, and then as a UCF fan, what are your thoughts on the Big 12 bringing these 4 teams in?
Yeah, so I mean, overall, it's super positive. It's two different scenarios here. We do have the 30 teams from the G5, and then of course BYU, who was independent. They made the hard decision to go from independent to in conference. Those moves are always, they have a lot of moving parts. TV rights deals is probably the biggest thing on everyone's mind with this most recent realignment. So I'm guessing that, played into the mix probably the most for them in making this move. Yeah, big money's on the table, like I said earlier, to come to a conference like the Big 12 and get into the Power 5. So these schools are obviously looking out for their best interests monetarily, but also the opportunities just for their athletes, for their teams. The same goes for UCF, Cincy, and Houston. All 3 of those are located. I mean, like you said, it's not like they're scrubs. Their records are all pretty good, especially of recent. Yeah, they're all located in large population centers with very large TV markets. And I think 2 of those, I don't think Houston is, but I believe Orlando is, and the Cincinnati area are both in the top 15 for college football TV markets. So, I mean, that's a no-brainer if you're the Big 12 to go after those 2 teams, lock that down for the future, because you're losing your 2 biggest teams. You got to replace them, next man up mentality. So, Houston, the area is no slouch as well. Big sports city. Also a great additional add. Yeah, I mean, the Big 12, I think where I give them the most credit is they got moving real quick. The second the Texas and Oklahoma scenario started, even before it was finalized, they got moving. I think they replaced their commissioner either just before or just after it happened. I cannot remember when that officially went down, but they replaced the commissioner. The new guy had, I think, experience with Disney marketing. So, the guy is not stupid. He goes after these really big programs, these really big schools. And yeah, I think just in the overall landscape, you can't fault anyone here. I know people don't like realignment, especially if you're a Pac-12 fan. I'm sure things are very scary right now.
Yes.
I'm sure we'll probably talk about that a little later, unless you guys already talked about it earlier. But yeah, pieces are moving in the Pac-12 as well. But yeah, I think in general, everyone at the very least is at some degree pro realignment. So yeah, I mean, I, as a neutral fan, I think it's a generally positive attitude. As a UCF fan, obviously I'm ecstatic. We've been in the G5. You do like to, have 9 to 10 win seasons all the time, but now that the playoff committee, sort of puts that whole, I can't remember the exact phrase they use, but the quality losses and all that stuff that they talk about behind the scenes,
Yeah.
You can no longer just beat a bunch of nobodies, a bunch of cupcakes. So I mean, Cincinnati snuck in recently, so that was very nice to see that they let a Group of 5 team in. But it didn't last long. Now Cincinnati and UCF have made the move to a Power 5 conference because there's more opportunities there, and you get a little bit more leeway with your losses.
Now, I will say, like I said earlier, because I think this conference is so competitive, I got UCF's schedule up here, and there's some really tough games on this. You got at Boise State, even though it is out of conference, that'll be a tough game. At Kansas State, at Kansas. I mean, Kansas was great to start last year, and they kind of skidded down the stretch. At Oklahoma, at Cincy, Oklahoma State, and Houston at home. I mean, it's just I love it. I do love the realignment. The only thing I didn't so much like, I don't really hate it, but I'm kind of like it's kind of weird, was when UCLA and USC moved to the Big Ten, mainly because it makes absolutely no sense geographically. Like, I understand money wise, it makes perfect sense, but like nothing says, a North Midwestern conference and two teams from Los Angeles. I did think that was weird, but overall, money wise, I do like the realignment overall. I'd say the big loser of all this realignment overall is the poor Conference USA, because you know what the American did after these teams left? They decided to take about half of Conference USA's roster. I was looking at the Conference USA teams this year. I hadn't even heard about half of these schools that they're going to have next season. They only got like 9 of them as well. So it's going to be rough for them. But I am excited to see teams like UTSA in the American this year. So we'll see what happens there. Mountain West is a pretty good Group 5 conference as well. SDSU, Boise State, Fresno State, Air Force. Will the Big 12 turn into the Big 12 seconds? I hate realignment. Well, Andrew, you're a Pac-2 fan, so that's not surprising, unless it's a Group 5 team moving up to the Power 5. So what's your kind of feeling about UCF this year? Do you think they could win, 9 or 10 games? Do you think it might be a bit of an adjustment period for them? Because like I said, they do play some tough games, but they're also, a really good team. They've been competitive for the past few years now. It is a big step up, but, it's kind of like you look at all their games, like you could say, yeah, they probably have a chance in all of them, but they're not runaway games either. Like there's a lot of games that could go either way.
Yeah, so I mean, it's tough. It's the first year in the big conference. You want them to do well, but like you said, that schedule is not very pretty. After I think they do the Texas schedule where it's cupcake, hard game, cupcake, and then you get into the conference games. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, some very tough road games is what I'll say. But then you got to think about the draft as well. You lose Isaiah Bowser, who was, in my opinion, I don't think he got, maybe I'm just a homer here. I don't think he got the praise that he deserved. He was a very good running back. And then obviously the most important, at least to me, is the QB situation, which I think is horrendous. Malzahn comes in and gets John Rice Plumlee as a sort of stopgap, which is nice until the guy who's in the wing waiting decides he doesn't want to sit anymore and leaves for Fresno State. And of course, I'm talking here about Mr. Mikey Keene. He's a bit of the same mold as, not as good, but same mold as your Milton, your Dylan Gabriel. So I think fans were expecting him, to be not the savior, but, get Plumlee out of there because the man has no arm. Phenomenal athlete. When he's running, he looks like, an Olympic sprinter. But as far as his arm goes, he's a bit of a wet noodle. So I don't think our offense is going to be very productive this year. So, yeah, to me, this is, I don't want to say I'm going to consider it a lost year, but maybe this is our growing pain year because under Plumlee, I don't think Malzahn's going to be able to do much of anything, especially with that schedule that you mentioned.
Transition year. How about that? That works. There you go. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think that those American teams will be pretty good and pretty competitive in a few years. But I think for right now, I think it's a little bit of an adjustment. I think if it was an easier conference, but like I said, I mean, I think it's so evenly matched. I mean, TCU didn't even win the conference last year, which I think a lot of people kind of forget about. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But let's actually get in those TCU Horned Frogs because, man, they lost so much to draft. They lost Max Duggan. They lost Kendre Miller. They lost 2 of their wide receivers. They lost D. Winters, who basically won that Michigan game for them all by himself, being in the backfield every 5 minutes. And they lost Hodges Tomlinson as well. This is a team that, in preseason last year, I don't think anybody would have ever expected to make college football playoffs. They went on a great run. And even though they did lose the conference championship game to Kansas State in overtime, they're able to make the college football playoff, beat Michigan before they hang on. Where is it? Here it is. They lost 65-7 against the Georgia Bulldogs. But this is a tough one, Brian, because it's hard to completely count out TCU after what they did last year, right? But you also have to look at all they lost, and kind of feels like TCU's already been written off in this conference race by a lot of people. So I want your take on this. Do you think TCU can be competitive in the Big 12 again this year? Or do you think just from how much they lost and the fact that it's really tough for them to recruit against Texas and Oklahoma, that it's inevitable that they take a step back and maybe lose 3, 4, 5 games this year?
Yeah, so I wouldn't go as far as to say 5. But I'm of two minds here. I don't think this was like a one-off black horse kind of year in 2022 where they weren't supposed to be there, I guess is how I'll put it. I do think they deserved to be there. They were a phenomenal team throughout the entire season. Definitely one of the best teams in the country, and certainly in the top 4. They had athletes all over the field. Max Duggan did a hell of a job commanding the offense. His stat line, he was like just shy of, I think, 3,700 yards, 41 total touchdowns, and only 8 picks. He did a good job commanding the entire offense from under center. The biggest piece that I think kind of bailed them out that they lost to the draft was Quentin Johnson, who I believe you just brought up. That's a big loss. He's what I like to call your bailout guy because of his size and presence. When your QB gets into trouble and has to just heave one up because of the pressure, you want one of those bailout guys out deep that you can just throw it in the direction. Johnson was one of the best in the country in that, and that's why he gets drafted in the first round. So you lose a bit of safety there, and top talent. He was very talented. Then of course you lose Kendre Miller, also a big piece. He got those dirty yards on the ground, the hard yards. But yeah, 2 of the guys that I think are less talked about. They got drafted, but it's not as exciting of positions as your QBs and your wide receivers and running backs. Steve Avila, their guard, he had a phenomenal season. They moved him to left guard just for this past season. I think they got someone in from a G5 team. It might have been from the American, honestly. He was an AP All-American, first team Big 12 honors as well, started all 15 games. He didn't allow a single sack in the 515 pass blocking snaps that he took all season for TCU. So if you want to give Max Duggan credit for all he did out there, you as well have to give it to Mr. Steve Avila for that protection, because QBs can't do it unless you got some big uglies out there protecting that space for you. And then, of course, as you said, Hodges Tomlinson also gone. So one of the best CBs in the conference. You hate to lose another talent like that. So and it's a lot of talent. Like I said, I don't think they just completely fall apart here, but I don't see them as contenders. That's just too much seniority to lose and too many key positions to make a challenge, I guess is how I'll leave that one.
Garth, where are you at on this one with TCU?
Yes, I think I'm kind of in the mindset of I don't see them falling off a cliff per se and just having a completely abysmal down year, kind of that title run hangover, if you will. But I do think that they've lost too much to the draft where they're going to be contending for the Big 12 and potential playoff spot. Also, too, I think one thing that is really, really hard to replicate for any team is the fact that they had a lot of kind of thriller comeback finishes where I don't want to use the word luck because they absolutely deserve to win for what they did. But
Mhm.
definitely it's one of those seasons where, like, if all of those things go your way and you pull it off, you have a very, very good season. But if they don't go all your way and you miss a play here and there, all of a sudden it is a completely different outcome and different season for that team. I think they'll be fine. They're going to be competitive. They're still going to be a very tough team to play. It's still a very talented roster. I like the coaching staff a lot. I think that these is a group of guys that get a lot more out of their players than most coaches would. And they had a really good time with the transfer portal this past season, trying to bring in guys to make up for all these departures to the NFL draft. So I think they have enough pieces to still stay competitive in the Big 12. And it's honestly a very wide open conference, so that benefits them. Their schedule isn't easy, but it's definitely manageable. They have a tough stretch where I think they have to play like 3 or 4 weeks in a row on the road, but overall it's not like a crazy difficult schedule that they can't make the most of. So, I could see them probably not competing for a Big 12 title, but kind of being that one step below it where they're maybe in like the top 4 or 5 teams for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you guys on this one. I think they lost a bit too much to kind of go for a repeat this year. But first of all, I think they're too well coached. I think the fact Sonny Dykes did all of that in his first season at TCU was just absolutely incredible. I think he did a great job. I think that they're still a solid team. They got some good transfers in, so I think they'll be competitive. But once again, I think it comes down. They just can't get recruiting like some of the bigger teams, like a Texas or Oklahoma. This isn't like a team like Alabama or even a Georgia now, to where they can lose half their roster and be just fine because they bring in all 4 and 5 stars. I think they're kind of one of those teams. All their best players last year were really experienced guys that were kind of leading the team by example, and now a lot of them are gone. So I think it's going to be a bit of a transition. I think, like Garth said as well, I think they had a lot of games that were really close. They had that. They had an overtime game that they won against Oklahoma State in double overtime. They beat Kansas by a touchdown. They had a game against Baylor where they won by 1 because they had to rush a field goal on as time expired to win that game. So I do think they'll take a step back. I think they'll still be pretty competitive. They might be like a 9-3 team. I don't think they're quite good enough to win the conference again. And that's another important thing. It's one thing to come out of nowhere, right, and have a great season when no one has expectations for you. To try and repeat it now, because TCU is now on everybody's radar. They can't come up and surprise everyone again. I think that'll be really tough for them as well. I do like them. I loved what they did last year, but we'll see what happens for them this season. David says LFG Dunphy is here, and I'm strong as yep. Okay. Moving on to the next segment. After that, we have the team that actually won the Big 12 last year, Brian, because like I said, I think a lot of people don't maybe not forget, but they kind of overlooked the team that actually won the conference because of what TCU did. And that's Kansas State, who beat TCU in overtime 31-28 to win the Big 12 last season. Now they do have a different quarterback situation last year. They had Adrian Martinez play most of last season, but Will Howard, who's actually coming into his 4th year there, he's been on the roster quite a while. This will be his real big chance here. He actually took over down the stretch and had 15 touchdown passes compared to only 4 interceptions. Kansas State, I think, is a team that is really interesting. I think their schedule is favorable. I'll get it up in a second because I don't have it memorized, but when I was looking at it earlier, I didn't really see a lot of teams or a lot of games that I thought would be incredibly difficult. Obviously, there's some challenges here and there. I got it up real quick. They play at Missouri. They play UCF, but at home. They play at Oklahoma State, Texas Tech on the road, TCU at home, Houston at home. I think their toughest game is actually at Texas on November 4th. I think that could be a pretty tough game. Then Baylor at Kansas, Iowa State. I think they have a favorable schedule. This is a tough one, though, because, it's tough to judge Kansas State because they did have a good season last year. They did win their conference, but they were also really interesting down the stretch. They actually lost 4 games, which you typically wouldn't expect, Brian, for a team that won a conference like the Big 12 when another Big 12 team went to the title game. They're kind of a weird team, in my opinion. So what's your take on Kansas State? Do you think they could take that next step with Will Howard at quarterback for the whole year this time? Or do you think they might take a step back and not be in contention to win the conference?
So I'm going to give them credit first before I basically give all the negatives.
Okay.
Let's be fair. That 4th loss, they were technically only 10-3. They played a very overpowered
Yeah.
Sugar Bowl opponent in Alabama, who I don't think they had much of a shot with, especially with Will Howard at QB, which is kind of where my issue is here. Um, let's not forget that most of the production last year came from Adrian Martinez. I think anyone who's watched him in his career, he's one of those weird ones where, I mean, you'll understand this because you guys just had Stetson Bennett. Everyone looks at Stetson and they're like, oh, he's not an elite talent, but somehow the guy just keeps pulling off win after win,
Yeah.
and they just got that winning energy that just wins come out of nowhere. They pull them out of their ass.
Mhm.
Martinez was one of those guys, and it was so fun to watch him in Kansas State play last. I mean, they were the wild card of that conference. Like you said, no one really expected them to win. You don't expect a 3-loss team in the regular season, to be there fighting for the conference championship, let alone winning it. So, but as far as Howard coming in or replacing Martinez, I'm not optimistic here for Kansas State.
Mhm.
I will say Kansas State, when I looked at their stat line for the entirety of last year, they had just one 300-plus yard passing game after Howard came in to replace Martinez. And if anyone is curious what that game is, it is the one game that Martinez came back to test if he was still good to go. So that wasn't even Will Howard throwing for 300-plus yards. That was Adrian
Mhm.
Martinez before he did get injured again. So, yeah, and I don't know. The thing that, if Tom's still in the chat here, he'll know that I like to um, kill people, especially QBs, if their conversions are not good, and their TD to interception ratios are not good. And I look at one stat line that makes me not optimistic, and it is the 59.8%
Oh yeah.
completion percentage of Mr. Will
Mhm.
Howard. And that comes off of only being sacked 8 times. So it's not like he didn't have the protection there. He was sacked less than 1 time per game that he played last season, and is still throwing under 60%. So when your guys are giving you time, you got to pull off something better than that. And then just as a non Will Howard player that I want to mention, obviously another draft loss is Felix Anaduki Uzamoa. Phenomenal talent on their defensive line. Guy is an absolute mammoth with the speed to go with it.
Mhm.
8.5 sacks. He is no longer there. So, the defense will survive. Kansas State has historically always been at least towards the top third in the conference in defense. But yeah, I do not trust Will Howard to operate that offense very well this season.
Yeah, I think Adrian Martinez, he was a bit underrated, but he was a really good playmaker. He had that dual threat. Will Howard can't run at all. Like, he literally cannot run at all. And like you said, he has accuracy issues. Um, I think it'll be a bit tough for him with Will Howard. I don't think he's terrible. I just think he has flaws in his game that like we know that Quinn Ewers at his best could be an incredible. He could throw 40 touchdowns if he was firing on all cylinders all year. You don't have that with Will Howard. Will Howard at his best, maybe he'll take care of the football. Maybe he'll throw 20, 25 touchdown passes at best. But he's got no dual threat, and I think they're really going to have to rely on their running backs like they did last year with good old Deuce Vaughn, who is another guy that they lost as well. That'll be a big
Yep.
piece for them, too. Garth, where are you at with Kansas State this season?
Yeah, I'm very 50-50 on this team. I think that a lot of their success is going to ride on the back of how good Howard can or can't play this season. If he can kind of take a step forward and improve, it's going to make life a lot easier for them. Do I expect it? Absolutely not. I'm not very huge on him in general, but also too a guy that you real quickly mentioned, that to me is an absolute huge loss for this roster and a position outside of the tight end that maybe makes life much, much easier for a quarterback. That's a running back position, Deuce Vaughn, because that guy, for me, I got to watch quite a few Kansas State football games over the past few years. That dude, since day one, has been an absolute stud there. 43 total touchdowns in his 3 seasons there, just shy of 5,000 total yards. He has been a staple for that offense. He's kind of been the do-it-all in both the rush game and the pass game for them. And when you have a quarterback kind of being not really thrown to the wolves because he does have some experience, but kind of taking over the reins completely, and he doesn't have that real reliable option that can kind of take the load off of him. I don't know. I think that this is a team that's still on paper one of the better teams in the conference. Their defense might be able to kind of carry the load for the majority of the season, but I think ultimately Will Howard is much like Spencer Sanders did with Oklahoma State and how good their defenses were for 2 or 3 seasons. He could be kind of that one weak link that holds them back from being as good as they should.
Yep, I agree with you guys. I think they'll take a step back. I still think they'll be competitive. Like, they could win 8 games, but I don't know if they'll be able to outright win like another 10 games, be able to compete for another conference game, conference championship. I don't know why I couldn't think of the words there, but I will say one thing in Kansas State's defense from last season: their losses, other than the Alabama game that you mentioned, Brian, which yeah, Bama was way better than Kansas State, as everyone would know, but they lost to Tulane, who was ranked number 9 in the season, and they also lost to TCU, obviously, and Texas, who were both ranked at the time when they played. So definitely didn't lose to any scrubs, but I don't think they'll quite have the talent to be able to win the Big 12 this season and make a playoff push. I think, look, whatever you think of Texas or not, I do love to troll about Texas choking all the time as much as the next guy, but they do have that top level talent. If they could put it all together, they could do it. I just don't see it with Kansas State personally. I think even Oklahoma might have a better shot of winning the Big 12 this season than Kansas State if Brent Venables can help that team take the next step. It'll be interesting to see. Now, last topic before we start getting into some predictions. And what do you know, Garth? More breaking news that happens like a day or two before the show. And funny enough, it's about the Big 12 as well. It's like they know. Good old Colorado saying screw you to the Pac-12. Coincidentally, when they wanted to depart when the Pac-12 TB deal was going bye-bye, which isn't a surprise. The Pac-12 is also, as Andrew loves to be reminded of, the lowest earning Power 5 conference, and it's not even close. They're losing teams every other year, it feels like. They even lost Colorado, who I believe won 1 game last season. Now, yes, they do have Deion Sanders. They had about 55 players transfer in the offseason. But if you're losing to even a team like Colorado, like, this isn't like you're losing USC and UCLA. You're losing Colorado, who has had like 1 or 2 decent seasons ever since they moved to Pac-12. They're going back to the Big 12, Brian. They're going to be in the Big 12 for the first time since 2010. And what do you know? They won in on that nice $31.7 million or whatever it is cut of that TB deal that the Big 12 is going to be signing. So that's good for them. Colorado's a weird team. I think it's a good first job for him in the Power 5 to move up from Jackson State. They're not a contending team or anything, but still Power 5 conference. They're moving to a better Power 5 conference, whether or not Andrew wants to admit it or not. Definitely financial-wise as well. So I think that makes sense. But it's going to be tough for them. Like we said, this conference is really competitive. So what were your thoughts when you saw that Colorado basically said screw you to the Pac-12 to move back to the Big 12?
I mean, not surprised, mostly because of Deion being there. I don't think they made that decision because he's there, but their brand has now taken on a new meaning. Their brand as an athletic program, not just in football, but because of him, all eyes are now on Colorado. He has reinvigorated, at the very least, the football team. And it's not like, I think they have a very good track program as well. They're decent in basketball. So yeah, this one I think makes a little less sense for the Big 12 to add. But it's a bit of a gamble that I like here, because if Deion is successful in his first couple years at Colorado, there will be more eyes on that program than your Alabamas and your Ohio States, because even fans of those teams will be tuning in to watch and see what's going on with Deion as he steals 5 stars from all around the nation from your blue blood teams. So I think it makes sense from the perspective of both sides here. I think it's a little early, but all the reports were basically saying that they wanted to get to 14 teams very quick. The Big 12 I'm talking about here. So this locks in team number 13 without much fuss. There has been a lot of fuss between the other teams that they've been looking at. Teams in Arizona's, the ramblings about the Washington teams. I have a feeling this happened behind the scenes very fast. I'm almost certain that's what happened because this news, the rumor broke, and within 2 hours, it was essentially official. So
Yeah.
the pieces move very quick on this one, but I think both parties will be happy unless Dion just goes on some like Kanye West style tirade where everything goes to hell very quickly. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think the players will trust. He's got a lot of 5 stars that put trust in going to Jackson State. Let's remember before Colorado. So I'm very optimistic on this one, and I do like the move.
Andrew says losing Colorado will not sink us. They have won more than 3 conference games once in the Pac-12. They do not have a Division I baseball or softball team. Well, Andrew, you have to be like one of only 5 people I know that actually watches college baseball and college
Here's
softball.
another one.
Yep, you're the other one. You were watching your Florida Gators get steamrolled in the College World Series by LSU. But hey, at least Wyatt Langford lucked out and went to the best team in the top 4 of the MLB draft. That was good for him. And good old Jack will probably be the number 1 pick next year. But that's besides the point. Garth, what were your thoughts on seeing this? Because like Brian said, it was like this became a story like, oh, this might happen. And then like you go to the bathroom for 5 minutes, you come back and it's like, what? Colorado's going to the Big 12 now? It was so sudden.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a few things. I think that obviously, at least on the surface, unless there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, it looks like the Pac-12 is quite frankly on the decline. And I think Colorado realizes that right now, much like Brian said, their stock is higher than ever with Dion and all the transfers and all the eyes are on them. There's just kind of that hype factor around the program right now where everybody's watching, whether you're a Colorado fan or not, in large part to Dion and coming there and what he's been able to do so far in his first few years being in the college football coaching department. And 2, realizing that, ultimately whether the Pac-12 succeeds or fails, goes up or down, the Big 12 is still a better option for them, and the time to get in is running out because that goal is 14 teams. They're already at 12. This will make 13. So like, hey, we got to get in while we can, take advantage of this TV deal, give ourselves kind of an even bigger stage to build on what we've got going on already with the addition of Deion Sanders and all this excitement around the program. Deion has already shown that he's a great recruiter. This should only help because kids obviously want to go to conferences that have the most eyes on them, have those big marquee games, and have a history of getting a lot of NFL players to the draft because usually that's one of, if not the most important factor for a high school recruit. How do you develop players and how many guys do you actually get into the NFL? So I think it's a combination of those different reasons. And ultimately, I think it's a really good move for Colorado. Whether they actually succeed or not and be a competitive team in the Big 12, that remains to be seen because me and Noah are kind of under the opinion of Deion can absolutely recruit. Can he put it together X and O's wise in a actual Power 5 conference? Hopefully he can because it would be kind of cool to see just as a complete neutral towards the situation. But nonetheless, really good move for Colorado, in my opinion.
I hope he does. Look, I love Deion. I think pretty much everyone loves Deion. The guy is box office. Like, if you want a guy as a football coach just to entertain you, he's on the top of the list. And you can tell, like Brian said, with all the great recruits he got in Jackson State, they buy into what he says because he can very easily relate to players. Because obviously, we know back when he was a player, he was a bit of a firecracker himself. So he knows what to say to him. He's not some old fogey. He's really good at man management. There's a soccer term for you, Brian. Good old man management. He's really good at that. So we'll see what happens. But I think it's a really tough conference. Like, I think they'll be decent, especially if Deion's there recruiting his socks off. It's just so tight. Like, it's really tough. And speaking of really tough, we're about to get to the predictions part. And I got to be honest, Garth, when we did the ACC and Pac-12 prediction ones, there were some ones where it's like, yeah, there's probably a few guys that could do it, but you can make a pick to where you're pretty confident about it. I have a feeling that some of these picks that we're about to make are either going to be spot on or they're going to be horrifically wrong, and we're going to look like idiots that have never watched this sport in our life, because some of these are really tough. We're going to start with Player of the Year. I don't think there's any clear consensus for any of these topic choices that we have. So, Garth, I'll start with you on this one. Where are you leaning for who do you think will be the Player of the Year in the Big 12 this year?
This one's kind of a total crapshoot. I think, obviously, whenever you talk Player of the Year, whether you want it to be or not, it's most likely going to be an offensive player. And I think the guy that I'm still really, really high on, honestly, despite how the team as a whole does this season, I do really like Quinn Ewers and what he showed there at Texas before the injury. That Alabama game before he went down was absolutely like a barn burner type game, like such a great game to watch as a neutral fan. And I think he's got a really good offensive line, which is very important for a quarterback. They do lose Robinson to the draft, so it'll be interesting to see how they replace him, but they do have a pretty deep room. They recruited that position very well, and he has a great wide receiver room around him. So I think that he's probably going to be my pick for Player of the Year.
Pretty solid choice, I think. Like I said, if he's firing all cylinders, I think he'd be a really good choice. What about you, Brian? Who do you think will be that player this year in the Big 12?
So before the show, I actually, when you gave the notes, I wasn't sure if this was for all of CFB or just the Big 12, but I'm glad it's just the Big 12 because that was the decision I made here. I'm going with a semi-homer pick here in Dylan Gabriel. He is insanely skilled. Maybe my favorite player behind Milton that we've had in the past couple of years, because I don't know. He's those two are so dialed in. I don't know what they feed these QBs that come out of Hawaii, but I mean they're just incredible to watch. He does lose Marvin Mims to the draft. That's gonna hurt a little bit. I don't know. I think Oklahoma, if we're talking about recruiting well, I think they do pretty well in the wide receiver category. So I think the production will still be there for him to throw to. But yeah, he's just an incredible athlete. I don't know. I think probably most people are familiar with this, but he did go to the same school as Mackenzie Milton, who is probably going to be the all-time favorite athlete in UCF fan history. But they're sort of built out of the same mold. Gabriel went on to even break all of Milton's high school records, as he was the next QB up in the development of that high school. Phenomenal athlete. And something I'm going to mention here, I'm going to go the opposite of when we talked about Texas and Oklahoma earlier, how I think the schedule would help Texas more for the playoff. I think Oklahoma's schedule would actually help Dylan Gabriel get a Player of the Year nomination here because it's a little bit weaker. So, he gets to pad that stat sheet a little bit more. I do think Ewers is probably the obvious competition here. So, who knows? If Ewers can stay healthy all season and he has a, very good to tremendous game against Alabama, I think he'll probably be the shoo-in. But as a UCF fan, I'm rooting for Gabriel here.
I think those are the two clear choices. I think if Ewers is firing all cylinders all year, it should be his. Because, like I said, he has the incredible talent to. I mean, the thing is, if Quinn Ewers plays to 100% of his capabilities the whole year, he could not just win Player of the Year. He could probably win a Heisman. Like, that's how talented that guy is. But I don't know. There's just this stigma I always have with a Texas team, because it always seems like every year we think this is the year they're going to do it. They're going to make the playoffs. They're going to have a great season. And then they go out and they get absolutely humiliated throughout the season and lose 4 or 5 games. And I think I could see that happening again. I think with a team like Oklahoma, I think their trajectory can only go up. Like, even last year when they were rebuilding, they still won 6 games. They still had a very competitive bowl game. They almost had a winning season. And I think Venables is only going to keep them going up. Plus, I really like Dylan Gabriel for a few reasons. Number one, he's accurate. He completed almost 63% of his passes last season. He's also mobile. He had 31 total touchdowns last year, 6 on the ground, almost 3,500 yards of total offense. I think he's very consistent. I think another thing with Ewers is he's inconsistent. Like I said earlier, it might have been the injury last year, and it might have been something mental because it was his first year starting pretty much. But I don't know. I think Gabriel could be a bit more consistent. Now, like I said, I think if Ewers is on, he could easily win this. But I just have a bit of skepticism about Texas this season. I think Gabriel might be a little bit more consistent. And while I think it's very close, I think I'll just give Gabriel the edge on this one. Plus, I've always loved him. I've always thought he's an underrated quarterback, even back to his Golden Knights days. So there you go. Coach of the Year. Now, I think this one is a little easier. Not quite so much easier, but a little easier. I'm probably going to go with Sarkisian on this one, unless Texas absolutely chokes the season away. Their schedule is fairly easy. I think obviously the Alabama game is tough, but looking at their schedule, I got it up here. Let me look at it again. At Baylor, Kansas versus Oklahoma, at Houston, BYU, Kansas State at home, at TCU, at Iowa State, Texas Tech. A lot of their toughest games there are actually at home, and their toughest game of the entire season is out of conference. So, I mean, look, Sark's a guy that everyone loves to dump on, but unless he absolutely craps the bed this season, I think they could actually be pretty good. I don't know if they'll make the playoffs type good. I think that solely depends on whether or not they beat Alabama. But I think when it comes to Big 12 contention, I think they'll be right near the top. I think Oklahoma could be there as well, but they're a little bit more of a question mark because they are still trying to rebuild. Whereas Texas, we always know they have the talent. It's just it seems like they underachieve a little bit too much. So I'll probably play on the safe side here and go Sark for this one. What about you, Garth?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to agree with you, Noah. There's a lot of good choices. The issue for me is, one, I don't see any of the incoming teams. I think they'll be competitive. I don't think any of them have quite a good enough year to where their coach is in that conversation. And then other guys that you might consider, like Kleiman for Kansas State, if he was going to win it, it was going to be last year. I don't think that they're going to repeat the same level of success like we talked about just a few moments ago. Same thing with TCU and Dykes. Kansas is really tough for me because they started so good last year. They've been down for so many years, kind of that the Vanderbilt of the conference in recent history, if you will. Last year they started very, very good, and then all of a sudden the brakes or the wheels fell off the bus, rather. There's a lot of guys who, if they're going to win it, it was going to be last year, or you don't see them quite doing enough to win it this year. And for that reason, I think I have to agree and probably go Steve Sarkisian here as well.
What about you, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, sorry to everyone watching. This one's a little bit boring, but I think it is the most logical of all the questions here that it is Sarkisian. But I did note down because I expected this might happen. I figured the pick will either be Sarkisian or a Venables comeback for season 2. So I wrote down my dark horse here, or wild card, if you will, is going to be Joey McGuire from Texas Tech. They're bringing back Tyler Shuck, the Oregon transfer, who is not great, but he's good enough to go up against we'll call them Big 12 defenses that may have some holes in them. They've been known to let up some yards, but yeah, he spent 4 years on the defensive side as an associate head coach at Baylor. He was the interim when Rule left for the Panthers, so he had some time to coach a pretty big program. I think Baylor, football-wise, at least of recent years, is the better of the two programs. And then Texas Tech goes out and gets him, and he beats Texas and OU both in his first season as a head coach for the Red Raiders. So, yeah, if he does that again, I think he's got a good shot for Coach of the Year nom here.
I actually like that pick a lot, and I actually had a little bit of a trivia question for you guys tonight. Do you guys know which team actually in the Big 12 this past season left off with the biggest win streak?
Is this including bowl game?
Yes. Yep.
Oh,
I know Texas Tech won 4 straight. TCU obviously lost. Kansas State lost. Texas lost. I'd probably have to go Texas Tech, honestly. I can't think of anyone else it could be.
That would be correct. They ended the year on a 4-game winning streak, and I actually am a very big proponent of kind of momentum. So I think that that's going to propel them to a pretty good season this year. Like I said earlier in the show too, I really like the coaching room that they've got there. I think that they get a lot, kind of that staff that gets a lot more out of lesser talent, if you will. They get a lot of players that play harder and achieve more than what they would say at another program.
Next one. This is a team that you think will overachieve that people might be sleeping on a bit. Brian, we'll start with you on this one.
Well, gotta go with the obvious one. You're saying we don't know how the new teams are going to do, so I'm going to go with UCF as my underachiever here for the reasons I brought up earlier. Plumlee is not the guy that you want under center. It's going to help that the Big 12 is sort of similar. That the American was kind of called like the baby Big 12, very similar in style. Defenses let up a lot of yards, high scoring shootouts a lot of the times, which I think anyone who's heard the phrase cardiac nights knows exactly what seasons of football we were talking about there for UCF. But yeah, he just has no arm, and a Malzahn offense is already kind of not ideal unless you have a very good QB who can kind of save you from play calls that aren't exciting, I'll say. The defense will be there, but I don't trust our offense enough. So I think we end up with a winning season, but UCF fans are still riding high on the last 5 or 6 years, and I don't think this first season is going to be as productive as they think. So how many wins? Probably just above 500, so 7. I'd say if we get 8 wins, I'll be very happy. But I'm not hopeful.
This is a tough one because, like I said, I think there's a lot of evenly matched teams on this one. I'm going to go with a team that recently won the conference, but last season actually had a losing record. And when I look at their schedule, they play Texas while it's at home. That'll be a tough game. At UCF, Texas Tech, at Cincy, Houston, at Kansas State, at TCU. They got some tough games on their schedule, and they were not good last year. I'm going to go with Baylor on this one. I think Baylor has really declined after last season, and I think the conference overall has strengthened compared to what it was a few years back when they won the conference with Oklahoma had a down season. Granted, they were still in contention, but they didn't make the championship game. Oklahoma State was in there, but, I mean, their quarterback was just, a guy. And they had a great defense, but even that, without Jim Knowles, I think that's taken a step back. But I don't know. I don't like what Baylor's doing. I think the conference is way too competitive. I think with the American teams coming in, they have even more competition. They were really bad last year. I don't have a lot of faith in their team. I think they could definitely lose. Looking back at their schedule, they also play Utah. I didn't even mention that one. So they could lose. I think they could lose 6 or 7 games looking at their schedule. I mean, even West Virginia, if they take a step up, that's not an easy game. So, yeah, I don't think Baylor's going to have a good year. What about you, Garth?
Yeah, this one, there's a number of teams I guess you could pick, especially based on how you define what would be an underachieving season for them. Like, obviously, I could see TCU underachieving in regards to last season because I don't think that they'll quite repeat that level of success they had. Like you said, Baylor actually was one of the teams that I was really heavily considering. Oklahoma State as well, because I feel like the thing that kind of carried them for years and years was how good that defense was, despite being in a conference that's not really known for good defense. But Jim Knowles, he's gone to Ohio State, obviously. I think, honestly, there, with all the good choices there is, I'm going to, for the sake of being a little bit different, I'm going to go with Cincinnati, actually, because another team moving to the Big 12 for their first year, being in a tougher conference. I don't think that they're as good as they've been in recent years as far as just pure talent level on the roster. I don't think their coaching staff is as good as it's been in recent years. And I think that this is probably kind of a year where they have a lot of growing pains and probably a rough season overall for them.
Mm-hmm. I already said mine, so let's move on to the next one. Well, let's flip it to the overachiever. This one is also tough. You're talking about teams that people aren't really high on, but could potentially have a good season. I think Iowa State's a good contender for this one. I think they had a terrible season last year, but they have had some good seasons recently. Brian, we'll start with you on this one. Who do you think's a team that is a bit under the radar and might actually overachieve in the Big 12 this year?
Yeah, this one is so difficult to me because there's so many different scenarios. I mean, obviously with the teams coming in, but you had Kansas State, sort of the Cinderella season, but they lose their most productive player. You've got Texas, who I think last year was the overachiever for most people with a freshman QB who just took Alabama to the wire. They had a phenomenal season, front to back. They blew out their rival. Can they do it again? Oklahoma, their team, it didn't go well, but like I said earlier, growing pains. So anything is, better than last season. At least I hope, for Oklahoma fans' sake. I think I'm gonna go with Oklahoma from the group because it's just too difficult to pick one of the G5 teams. As you can see, a lot of us just picked G5 teams to be the underachievers. So I don't think people are too high on them for this first season. Let them grow into the conference. But Oklahoma, I really like Venables. And the key there is, you bring in a guy who is very defensive minded as your head coach. And, like I said, 2 minutes ago, these teams, their defenses are kind of like Swiss cheese in the Big 12. So if you can lock down your defense, the offense will pretty much always be there, especially for a team like Oklahoma. So you got both sides of the ball covered there. And I think with a coach like Venables, you got to do better than last season. I don't see how there's any way that they do worse than last season. So I think they'll overachieve and get a 10-win season here, which I don't think many people are probably expecting after how average they were last season.
Yeah, Venables is the man. I mean, look, if you can keep a Clemson team relevant when you got DJ at quarterback, I mean that's all you need to say. And I think he's already kind of putting an imprint on Oklahoma this season. I do agree they'll take a next step up. For my overachiever, I am going with a team in Oklahoma, but I'm not going with the Sooners. I'm actually going to go with Oklahoma State on this one. First of all, I mean, it's always great to have a coach's experience as Mike Gundy. They've been consistently competitive while he's been there. But then I look at their schedule, and I see all their away games are against easier teams. I'm not going to say easy teams, but you have a couple Group 5 teams. They play Houston and UCF on the road. They also play West Virginia, who was 5-7 last year, at Arizona State. In their home games, they play Kansas, they play Cincinnati, Oklahoma, which I think will be their toughest one, and they play BYU. So when I look at their games, I don't see a lot of games that I would have them as a clear underdog. I mean, you can say the Oklahoma game, but even then, that's still a massive rivalry. It could probably be a close game. I think they would probably be favorites against the Group 5 away games. I think they'd be a favorite against Cincinnati, but that's more of a toss-up game, and they'd be big favorites against West Virginia and Kansas. Kansas State's another kind of toss-up game. I think they're a team that could, if they can win those toss-up games, I think they could sneakily win 9 or 10. I'm not going to go all in on it just yet. Like, I'm not going to pick them to win the conference or anything, but I think they could have a sneaky season and maybe get double-digit wins if they win all their tight games. What about you on this one, Garth?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go with Texas Tech here, guys. Like I mentioned earlier, I do really like the fact how they ended last season. They have a lot of positive momentum going into this year. Also, one thing that I don't think is talked about quite enough because of things like how TCU performed last year. Last year was actually Joe McGuire's first year there as a head coach. So obviously there's a lot of learning curve there, adjusting, whereas this year he comes in with the experience of a whole season under his belt in the Big 12, being the head coach there. So he's going to come into this season a lot more experienced and just knowing what to expect and what he needs to do to prepare week in, week out. They bring back a lot of guys, a lot of starters from last year's team. He actually had a top 25 recruiting year in his first cycle there. And also, too, a lot like you were just saying, Noah, with Oklahoma State, I do take a look at their schedule, and I really like it. They play Wyoming on the road. That should be a win. They do have to play Oregon in week 2, but at least it's at home. So you could say they have a fair shot in that game, being early in the year at home. Tarleton State at home. That should be a win. West Virginia on the road. West Virginia is nowhere near what they used to be in the past. I don't see why they can't win that game. They get Houston at home. They do have to travel to Baylor, but I'm not as high on Baylor as I've been in recent years. Kansas State, a tough game, but at home. At BYU, TCU at home, at Kansas, UCF at home, and at Texas. So they do definitely have some tougher games on their schedule there. But the good news is a lot of them they get to face at home, and that's a huge advantage in college football. So I think that this is a team that could very well, even if it's only 9 or 10 wins, which is a 1 or 2 win improvement, I still think that that would be a lot more out of them than what most people are expecting from them.
Oh, yeah, another thing I forgot to mention for my Oklahoma State pick, losing Spencer Sanders is addition by subtraction. That's all I'm going to say on that one.
Can't agree enough.
Now, this is where we get to the fun stuff. Teams that will be in the conference championship game and then, obviously, conference winner. I'll go first on this one because I don't know if I've gone first the whole show. I think this is actually probably the easiest one for me. I think it is very competitive, but overall, I think there's two teams that just, plain and simply recruiting-wise, they just can easily get the best players. Like when you both teams get a top 5 recruiting class, now once again, it's not guaranteed. I mean, we saw what good old Jimbo did with that number 1 class last season. They were just an absolute disaster. But I think if these teams don't absolutely choke, I think their schedules are favorable. I think they have good players, and my cat agrees as well. I'm going to go with Texas and Oklahoma in this one. I think they'll make the championship game. I think there could be a Red River rivalry championship game, which would be absolutely incredible. As for who I think wins, it's just I hate to say it because I want Oklahoma to win, but I think if Texas is firing on all cylinders with the talent that they have, if Quinn Ewers is up to the standards that I think he could be, I think they could win the Big 12. Of course, it's also Texas, so that means they could also lose 5 games and everyone would laugh at them. But you know what? I always have that one prediction in preseason every year that completely bites me in the ass. So go ahead and give me Texas. They can win the Big 12 this season. Garth, what do you think?
So I think the one out of the 2 picks is really easy for me. I definitely have Texas being in that championship game. The second team is where it gets tricky. If Kansas State were returning their quarterback and running back, I probably would very easily slot them into it. But because of that, I cannot. TCU, they were there last year. It's really tough to put them back with everything that they lost in the offseason. I could definitely see Oklahoma not really overachieving, but more so playing up to their standard this year and being in there and having one hell of a rivalry match for this game. I think this will be my first one where I kind of go out on a limb and make a dark horse prediction, or not really keeping with the most logical. I'm going to go with a Texas Tech Big 12 championship team. I really like Texas Tech as a dark horse in this Big 12 conference this year.
Man, you're going all in on Texas Tech. You're either going to look like a genius or you're going to look like you know nothing about college football at the end of the year. There's going to be no in between, but I love it. It's ballsy. I respected it. It's definitely a bit out there, whereas I went the safe choice. You just went all in on good old Texas Tech, so I got to respect you for that. Brian, where are you leaning on this one?
Yeah, I'm with you, Noah. I think it's almost, I don't want to say certainly, but it's too much chaos going on around the rest of the conference to where you can't just go with your blue bloods here. I think it's going to be Texas and Oklahoma. I agree with both of you that Texas is the most obvious choice. Oklahoma is going to have a little bit more of a struggle getting there, but it's not an entirely different format, but there are more teams. You don't get to play everyone. I think the schedules are fairly even, but I just think Oklahoma gets the edge for that second spot because of what I was saying earlier, that their schedule is a little bit easier. I think Texas can easily pull off the tougher schedule and lock in their spot. But if I want to throw in a wild card, since Garth did one, I'm going to go with, we said the G5 teams weren't going to have a good season, but what about the independent team? BYU is always a very solid team. Quarterback situation has been not great. If Tom is still in the chat, he can attest to how much we dogged on them for that. But yeah, I don't know. BYU is just one. Same with Boise State. Something that's going on in that area over there, um, in those mountains. I think it's a thin air maybe. They just produce like some fantastic teams.
Mm-hmm.
You know, line play is never a problem on both sides of the ball. They just bring in some massive guys from the islands. I think their coach is an Islander as well. So, you know, you get those big Samoan boys in there, and you can protect your QB, you can protect your running back. But yeah, they're just one of those teams. They're always fun to watch as an independent, and you know, they're always solid. So, um, because the conference is such a wild card this year, I think, and you know, next year when Texas and Oklahoma leave, it's going to leave a big gap for these teams to step up. I think BYU is one of those teams that has a good shot.
Yeah, I think with Texas and Oklahoma lead this conference, it's going to be absolute mayhem. It's going to be like the shootout at the OK Corral, because these teams are just going to be going for it. There would never be a consensus favorite without those teams. But I like what you guys are doing. I like that you're going outside the box, whereas I was playing it a bit safe. But obviously, the two teams I chose won't even be there next season. So we'll see if I'm right. Maybe they could have a nice Cinderella farewell to the Big 12, or maybe Texas could just underachieve again, like they always try to do. And except for last year, like you said, or I do think they overachieved last year. If they had just beaten Alabama, I think their season would have been completely different. But obviously they didn't, and I hated that happened because I hate Alabama. I was rooting for Texas the whole game. It didn't quite work. Tom says, I'll be watching this back tomorrow, but love this collaboration. Thank you, Tom. Happy birthday once again. Happy birthday, old man. David Dunphy says, go Tigers. BYU should have been in the pack. Andrew is still coping over here about the Pac-9. But, yeah, that's all we got for predictions. So, Brian, real quick before we do let you go, once again, let everyone know where we can find you, find your podcast, what you're all about over there on From the Stands.
Sure. Typically, we're on YouTube during the season. We have a weekly college football game day show with myself, Mr. Tom Scavetta, who's in the comments, and Mr. Andy Hoppe, our resident Illinois fan. You can find us there at From the Stand Sports. And I believe our Facebook is exactly the same. And Twitter, we typically live tweet with all the highlights, all the action every game week. That is From the Stands US, because somebody snuck in there and took our handle before we got there. But yeah, those are our three big ones. And if you like college football, be sure to tune in.
Yeah, make sure to check out their Facebook. I linked it in the chat. Also, look them up on YouTube and Twitter. Brian, it's been great talking to you. This was our first time talking college football, or really talking sports in general, in a one-on-one setting. So it was a lot of fun to get your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was nice talking to you. Nice talking to you, Garth, as well. Wish we wouldn't have had wish I would not have had technical difficulties there in the start, but what are you going to do? That is live TV, as they say.
It is indeed, and hey, you know what? Me and Garth were expertly stalling the entire time, so you didn't miss any topics.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, me and Noah are experts now with the technical difficulties.
Oh God, yeah, yes, we are, aren't we, Kitty? Yeah, my luck with technology is so bad. So before we let you go, I bought a $1,400 laptop that shit the bed about 2 years after I bought it. My phone broke. I got a replacement phone. Turns out that phone was defective as well, so I have to return it and get another phone. I had a iPhone die after 2 months for no reason. So that was fun as well. What else have I had? I had two Xbox 360s when they first came out. Both died in less than a year for no reason. That was fun as well. I almost had a PS4 die. Luckily, I was able to save it, but it was on cardiac support for a little bit there. But yeah, my technology luck is not good, so I definitely sympathize with Brian on that one. But we got it figured out. We had a banger show. Brian, hoping we can talk to you again soon, get some of your thoughts during the course of the season. And who knows, maybe if you're doing From the Stands at some point and you ever want a guest, Garth and I don't have lives, so we'd be excited to be on there as well. But yeah, really excited to talk to you, and hopefully we can talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, like you said, I'm sure now knowing that you guys are such big college football fans, I knew you guys did the hockey.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm sure we'll try to get you on for a show or two this season. And I will say, I'm not very sympathetic to all your technology woes, because I think The trade-off that you got there from karma was back-to-back national championships with your Georgia Bulldogs. So, well worth it, I think, in that trade-off. I think he won there. There you go.
It was very worth it, and I have to remind Garth of it every single day, and it makes him cry on the inside, which I love. But great for Florida Georgia week. Yeah, it was. Brian, it was great talking to you, and then we'll see you next time. All right, man?
All right. Thank you, guys.
Have a good night. That has been Brian McArdle from the Stand Sports, and that is going to do it for this show, the Big 12 prediction show. We have 2 more conferences left. We got the Big 10 next week, and we got the SEC after that. So we're going to be fired up for those. We're going to have guests on for those as well. Garth, do you have any last-minute thoughts before we wrap it up here for the night?
Just a huge thank you, as always, to everybody that tuned in. Absolutely lit up the comment section yet again, whether it was pertaining to our subject matter tonight, the Big 12, or crying tears of agony over the Pac-12, now known as the Pac-9. Either way, regardless, we love and appreciate all the support that we get here on a weekly basis. We're another week closer to college football, so all the more reason to be extremely excited. Like you said, still 2 more prediction shows to go, 2 more great guests. We are on an absolute roll this season. Hands down, probably our best preseason yet. This will be an all-time record for guest appearances on the show consecutively. So, just really, really big things to come, and it's been an awesome blast already so far with what we have done. I think it'll be our best year yet of the Sweet Tea show here on the Sports Box, and we've still got plenty to come. So make sure you guys are catching us every week. Tell your friends about us. Get your family, get your dogs, your cats, whatever. Tune in Friday nights. Really excited for what's to come. And last but not least, huge thank you to Brian for persevering through the technical difficulties and joining us tonight to give us some of his expertise, as he is one of the best in the business, honestly, at least that me and Noah know personally when it comes to college football. They're from the stands in the podcast that they do for college football. But yeah, just to wrap it up, a huge thank you again to both our special guests tonight and everybody that tuned in. And also, one other thing that I want to say, I know we said it already earlier in the show, huge happy birthday to Tom Scavetta, man. We love you. You're one of our best friends in this kind of podcasting network of sports and in general, honestly, just a really good dude. We really appreciate of you, man, and I hope you have a great rest of your night and great day. And like you said in a comment just a few minutes ago, Florida Georgia week is coming very, very quickly. It'll be here before you know it. But with that, just thank you guys, everybody that tuned in.
Yeah, they killed it. And like you said, Garth, this has been a phenomenal start this season. We're getting back to being really consistent. We're getting great guests, production values through the roof, making thumbnails, putting music. Interaction has been ridiculously consistently excellent. Like, it's just been awesome. I was telling Brian this earlier today when we were talking. I've never had more fun doing this show than I have now. Like, it's just insane. And it's only going to get even better when the actual season comes and we got actual games to talk about. So, yes, this has been excellent. So, thank you to everyone for watching. From myself, Noah Dog Gladber, my co-host and good buddy, Gar Charger Patrick, and my still unnamed kitty cat, who is white and black and a big troublemaker. This has been another episode of the Sweet Tea Show here on the Sports Box. We'll be back next Thursday or Friday. Actually, Thursday, because it works with our guests better. Yep. So we'll be back next Thursday around 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 to 8. You guys know how flexible you are with the schedule. We'll see what happens. But until then, stay safe and have a good one. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching this episode of Sweet Tea on the Sports Box. Please remember to follow us on all of our social media outlets. On Facebook at Sportsbox Show, Twitter at Sportsbox Show, Instagram at The Sportsbox Show. Find us on YouTube and join Outside the Box, our Facebook sports discussion group. The Sports Box is brought to you by our sponsor, Showcase Sports in Hamilton. Showcase Sports for the elite athlete. And also our friends over at CrowdPlay. Download the free CrowdPlay app today and use promo code THEBOX at sign up for 10 free points. Thank you for joining us.